Greetings, folks. Nice to see you. My name is Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. We're going to be continuing our reading on Light on Life by Robert E. Svodoba and Hart Fouw. We've just talked about the houses of a horoscope, how the Earth's diurnal motion on its own axis brings essentially half, if not more than half, of the needed data in order to truly map and therefore interpret the horoscope. Next, we are actually going to get into the mapping of the horoscope. What kind of map do we use? What does it look like? What does it mean? What is the anciently derived way of mapping a horoscope? There's two main ways as we explained in the last episode. And I should make the point, even though I just rang it through the ringer in the last episode, I'm going to make the point again that there is not, the difference between measuring using the northern horoscope, where the lagna is dynamic and the whole chart changes to the lagna, the ascendant being at the top, always at the top of the chart. That's like a changeable. It's where the stars and the proper motion of the planets spin according to the map spins according to the Earth's perspective. Whereas the classical southern style of chart does not change. As we can see, this little line that I've drawn here is the lagna, and wherever the lagna is just placed on an essentially fixed schema, where Aries, the sign of Aries here, is always the same. Taurus is always in the same place. Gemini is always on that right top corner. And there's lots of reasons for this. It shows a lot of beautiful wisdoms having to do with the fact that the mutable signs are always on the corners. The the cardinal sign, rather, is always the sign right after a corner, right? Aries comes after this corner, Pisces. Cancer comes after this corner, Gemini, etc. There are patterns there that are beautiful. Ultimately, I would suggest that you use both. We're going to talk about the strengths of each and the reasons for each right now in this episode. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let's just get right into it instead of me squawking the whole time. This is the mapping of a horoscope. Our authors begin. Astrology's first step is to calculate a map of the heavens, an arithmetical process whose description is beyond the scope of this book. While many people, especially non-mathematically inclined students, resort to computerized astrological calculations to avoid this initially cumbersome area of astrology, myself admittedly included, we believe that anyone who wishes to pursue the study of Jyotish seriously should learn how to calculate a basic horoscope manually, something that I am desirous to do at some point in my life. No matter how you obtain them, astrological calculations should be as precise as possible. After calculation comes astrology's second step, the presentation of the calculated results in the form of a map of the heavens as tied down by the lagna. Now, different cultures use different ways to map the three-dimensional heavens on a two-dimensional surface. While horoscopes in the West are usually represented today in a circular form, in India they appear most often in square or rectangular form. The horoscope diagram, which is primarily used in this book, is one which is used by most of the astrologers of northern India. Yeah, so these guys are used to using the northern chart, where the lagna sets the position of the signs. This basic representation of a natal chart is known as a Rashi chart. It represents the houses and constellations simultaneously, by dividing a rectangle into 12 segments as shown in figure 3.1. It's a diamond in the middle and also with a cross going through it, essentially, right? You can always draw one of these just by putting a point at the center of each line, right? Drawing a point from that point to that point, from the middle of this line to the middle of this line, to the middle of this line to the middle of this line, etc., and then draw an X through it. The diamond marked A always represents the first house. The triangle marked B, adjacent and to the left of A, always represents the second house. I wish this thing would stop being blurry. In any case, B always represents the second house, and so on. The representation of the houses continuing consecutively until the 12th house, marked L in this diagram, completes it. First house, second house, third house, fourth house, D, fifth house, E, sixth house, F, seventh house, G. Now, there's lots to be said about why people love this chart. Obviously, right away, I haven't used it for a while, and I'm remembered of the fact that it shows that the second and third houses are not as primary or opportune as the cardinal houses. And it shows the centrality of the cardinal houses, which is very useful and just, symbolic in its way. Now, the houses are fixed in the horoscope in the same way that they are fixed in each locality, with the ascendant always on the eastern horizon. The authors state that they prefer the northern Indian style of horoscope mapping because it reflects astronomical reality by showing the houses as being fixed in space. Since the respective houses in this type of horoscope always occur in the same places, meaning that the second house from the Lagna is always the second house from the Lagna. The second house from Gemini is always going to be Leo. The second house from Pisces is always going to be Aries. The third house from Leo is always going to be Libra. So since the respective houses in this type of horoscope always occur in the same places, Jyotishis memorize the house positions in the diagram, counting them consecutively, counterclockwise, so that they need not identify the houses visibly. Meaning that you could just look in this horoscope, you'll see that it's a Virgo rising, and wherever the planet is, you'll always know that that's the same as in a Virgo's chart, Virgo being sign number 6. That Saturn in that position is the same in a Virgo's chart as it would look if it were an Aries with Saturn in Taurus. It would be in that same position, and you will always know that that's the symbology of Saturn in the second house. So the house patterns get imprinted in the northern style, like this chart. Now, the constellations superimpose on each of the 12 houses. The constellations superimposed on each of the 12 houses will, however, vary according to the ascendant at the birth time and birthplace, for a total of 12 possible arrangements. The number that appears written inside each house of this type of horoscope is the number of the constellation of the zodiac superimposing itself on that house. The lord of that constellation becomes, in that horoscope, the lord of that house. So just for a fun little demonstration here, it's my own book, so I can do this. You can see here in this, in my little horoscope here, you can see that I've drawn the figure of Mercury. Mercury is in the 7th house here in the sign of Pisces. And that Mercury is the first lord, the lord of the first house, as well, of course, as also the lord of the 10th house, being Mercury also ruling sign number 3, which is Gemini. So this Mercury owns the 10th and the first house. And these two houses are expressing themselves through that Mercury in the 7th house, just as an example. Now, the lords of the constellations are always fixed, meaning no matter where, no matter what time of day, no matter what time of the year, Mercury is always going to rule Gemini, the sign of Gemini and the sign of Virgo. But the lords of the houses vary from horoscope to horoscope. Who owns the houses depends on the ascendant. So, for example, Jupiter may rule or own houses 1 and 4 in one horoscope, houses 2 and 5 in another, houses 3 and 6 in yet another, and so on. Figure 3.2 here shows a horoscope with a Virgo ascendant superimposed on the first house. Here, Libra is superimposed on the 2nd house, Scorpio on the 3rd house, and so on up to Leo on the 12th house, right? Virgo is this number 6, Libra number 7, Scorpio number 8, and then Sagittarius number 9, considered to be the 4th house from the ascendant, etc. With houses and constellations now represented in the diagram, a planet's position in the horoscope is indicated simply by writing its name into that sector of the horoscope, which bears the number of the constellation that corresponds to the planet's position. Right. So, for example, if Saturn were in Libra at the time of the birth in this chart, Saturn would be entered into this chart as shown. Saturn is in the 2nd house. We can see that because the 2nd house is always this particular triangle here. But we know that it's in the sign of Libra because of that number 7, 7 being the 7th sign, and Libra, of course, being the 2nd sign from Virgo. Now the next figure, figure 3.3, it's going to show a horoscope with a Gemini logna, or Gemini ascendant, which puts Cancer in the 2nd house. Let's see if I can do something like this. It's not going to work. Anyway, I'm just going to show you a little glimpse of the chart here. Saturn in the 1st house of the Gemini rising, and all the planets scattered about. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it, and then we'll digest what we're looking at and what we're reading as we go. So, this is a Gemini rising. This puts Cancer in the 2nd house, Leo in the 3rd house, and so on up to Taurus in the 12th house. Saturn is in the 1st house in the constellation of Gemini. Right? Jupiter, Sun, and Rahu are in the 2nd house in the constellation of Cancer. Sun, Rahu, Jupiter in the sign of Cancer, that being the 4th sign. And it's, of course, the 2nd house from Gemini. Mercury and Venus are in the 3rd house in the constellation of Leo. The moon is in the 5th house in the constellation of Libra. It's important that we see the tricona signs. There's always going to be this certain type of triangle. Maybe I can just mark those out right now. I don't have any proper pens, but just find some little 1, 5, 9. What the heck, it's my own book. I can draw it on it if I want to. So this is sign number 3, of course, is Gemini, an air sign. That's the 1st house. Sign number 5, of course, is the 7th sign, Libra, another air sign, right? That's the 5th house. Then the triangle from that is sign number 11, Aquarius, which is the 9th house from the Gemini rising, right? So that's what the trianal houses look like. Let's call this particular horoscope, to which we will return later in the book, Chart 1. Now in this chart, the first house has Gemini superimposed on it. We may say that the first house is occupied by Gemini, or simply that Gemini is in the first house. Similarly, Sagittarius is in the 7th house. Because Gemini is ruled by Mercury, the first house is said in this case to be ruled by Mercury. Mercury is the ruler, lord, or owner. These words all being synonymous in their astrological usage of the first house. Jupiter in this horoscope then becomes the lord of the 7th and 10th houses, because Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces, which in this horoscope are superimposed over the 7th and 10th houses, respectively. Mercury becomes the ruler of the 4th house, Sun the owner of the 3rd house, and so on. It's just the way it is for a Gemini rising. Sign number 3. Sign number 4 is Cancer, therefore the moon rules the 2nd house. Leo rules the 3rd house, being sign number 5. Then sign number 6 is Virgo, which is again also ruled by this darn blurry camera. Virgo and Gemini being both ruled by Mercury. So there's a blending of the numerology of the signs with the numerology of the houses here, which is, of course, how it is with every astrological tradition, whether they know it or not. So, the lordship and the occupation of the planets in the horoscope, shown in figure 3.3, this chart we're looking at, can lead to statements of the following type. Let's say Saturn is in or occupies the 1st house. Mercury and Venus occupy the 3rd house. Right? The lord of the 1st house, Mercury, dwells in the 3rd house. Gemini rising, the lord of the ascent Lagna being Mercury, since this is a Gemini rising, the lord of the Lagna is in the 3rd house, that being Leo, the 5th sign. The ruler of the 9th house, Saturn, is tenanting the 1st house. That's Saturn, as we saw in the 1st house. Now, because each house has its own ruler, we can also express the last two statements in another way. Mercury, the 1st house lord, or the first lord, is situated in the sun's house, because the sun in this horoscope rules the 3rd house. So we can see Mercury, this is the ascendant lord, is in the 3rd house, which is the sun's house. Come on, stupid blurry camera. Anyway, the 5th sign, Leo, rules the 3rd house, and Mercury is in the sun's house. Saturn, the 9th lord, occupies Mercury's constellation in the 1st house, or it occupies Mercury's house. The ability to describe and analyze planetary placements in a horoscope in this way must become habitual and instinctive. Now, the next figure we're going to see, figure 3.4, is a way of representing a horoscope which is particularly popular in southern India. In this type of diagram, the The constellations are always represented by the same squares. And so, once memorized, there is no need to identify the squares with any symbols for the constellations. Let me just digest that again. The constellations are always represented by the same squares. And so, once memorized, there's no need to identify the squares with any symbols for the constellations. I see. So the square marked A here represents the constellation Aries. The one marked B represents Taurus, and so on consecutively until the last square, L, which represents Pisces. This is our southern Indian chart. I'm just going to try and get my camera to stop blurring out on me. And what this says is the diagonal... Oh, come on. Stupid camera. Come on, baby. Here we go. Okay, so the diagonal line, which represents the ascendant or lagna in this type of figure, can also be shown by LG or lagna. And that's this line right here. It's that little diagonal line. Since the lagna in the other style of chart is made obvious by the fact that all of the signs shift to the lagna position. In the case of the southern chart, we need to represent the lagna position with that diagonal line. But the sign positions here don't change. A is always Aries. B is always Taurus. C is always Gemini. So when you look at a southern chart, if you see a planet in this corner, Gemini, you always know that it's Gemini. Although in order to know what house that is, you have to judge that from the lagna. Here we see that the lagna is in the sign of Virgo, which is where this square always means. Gemini, therefore, is in the 10th house from Virgo, right? The ascendant in this type of chart is shown by a diagonal line, or by the word lagna, the LG for short. The houses are counted in the direction of the constellations in their natural order, commencing the count from the square where the diagonal or the lagna occurs. Again, in this little chart, the example is here. The lagna is in Gemini. So this is the same chart as in the last chart, right? Saturn is in the lagna. Jupiter, Rahu, Sun are all in Cancer in the 2nd house. Mercury and Venus are in Leo in the 3rd house, right? So, so this chart here, figure 3.4, shows the lagna to be in, blah, 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 sorry. This is where I'm looking at. It's this figure here, this one that I just showed you, represents, in this style of chart, the horoscope that we had seen before. Again, that's with Saturn on the lagna, all these planets in the 2nd house, etc. So sorry, I'm just making sure we're on the right page here, folks. Next, there's going to be, we're going to see 2 more charts here that we're going to be looking at ultimately throughout these lessons in this book as we come on down the line. It's figure 3.6 and 3.7 represent in the Northern Indian and Southern Indian styles, respectively, a horoscope which we'll refer to later in the book as chart 2. So this is chart 2. It's going to show both if I can help it. It's a Virgo rising. You can see that the sun is in the 1st house. Venus and Mercury are in Libra in the 2nd house. Jupiter and Saturn in that cardinal 4th house of Sagittarius, the 9th sign. Right, the 9th sign Sagittarius, the 4th house from the lagna. See, in the 6th house of lagna is Ketu, because of course Rahu is in the 12th, in Leo, the 5th sign. Now, we're using those numbers to derive where the signs are. In this chart's case, we can see the same exact chart written here. I'm just going to... I'm used to seeing this little diagonal line here, even though I kind of screwed it up. This is the same chart derived in the southern style of chart. I would recommend, if you want to go further in these lessons, just do yourself a favor. Take this chart. Maybe go with this chart, let's say. Draw it out in the southern style. Draw out where all the planets are, just like you see here. And then recreate this chart. Of course, you see it now. The answer is there, and it's easy. But just for your sake, for your practice sake, get out a piece of paper, mark this out, and then try to define for yourself. Map it out in the way that would be done in the northern chart. Then, what I, as your teacher, want you to do is to draw out this. This is that first chart we saw with the Gemini rising, Sun, Rahu, and Jupiter in Cancer in the second house, etc. I want you to take this chart. I'll try to get it perfect. There you go. Take this chart and derive it in the southern chart style. That way it's just going to give you it's simple thing. But this is one of those things that you got to really get your foot on the bike pedal, push forward. Can't really learn to ride a bike by reading it in a book. At some point you just got to grab a handlebar, put your foot on the pedal, and just start making those gyrating motions, and eventually you'll get it smooth. Try them both. Actively do both, and then finally do it with your own horoscope. Of course, that's the final bit of homework that I want you to do before you move on to the next part of the lessons in this book. As an exercise in horoscope mapping. Aha! Look at that. I instinctively wanted you guys to do that. The authors are going to tell us to do the same. As an exercise in horoscope mapping, copy out charts 1 and 2 onto a sheet of paper. Keep these copies handy as you go through this book so that you can inspect each for the basic principles of Jyotish as they are introduced. Charts 1 and 2 are displayed in full detail in the appendix of the book. As we can see here, I've already kind of got them both happening, or at least when I first went through the book, I sketched them out for myself. And I recommend you do the same. On the next chapter, the next time I put out this series, if you're joining me, we'll be reading from chapter 4, talking about the grahas, the planets, which are the basic language of Jyotish. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I really love doing these lessons with you folks. We still got plenty to do. This book is some 400 pages long, although we're not going to go through all of it, but we are going to go through most of the guts of it. And for your reference, we've just done everything we've done, and we are only 55 pages through. Chapter 4 starts on the 55th page of the book. So, if you've been with me so far, I hope you're excited, and I hope you're enjoying this, because we got lots more to go. Jyotish is thick, but this is, it's better to, humans are complex, and it's better that we're this complex and that our karma can be this dense to interpret, or else things would be simple, right? And things wouldn't be as true and interesting and surreally challenging and rewarding and wild and fantastic as human life is at its most natural and real. But I digress. I could wax philosophic. For now, I'm just going to rock and roll. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Keep your eyes peeled. The new lessons will be coming out soon after this batch. I love you folks, and stay with me because we are going to keep unfolding this eternally peeling onion that is the heart of Jyotish. And I can't wait to see you there. Thanks for watching.